back in June for ANCs. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, we are going to be recording this session. I hope that's okay with everybody. We want to be able to include a recording of at least one of the two sessions on our website for the use of ANC commissioners or members of the public who want to refer to the presentation, maybe for ANC commissioners who weren't able to attend one of the presentations today. So I think Joshua has started that recording now. So in terms of process, like I said, each of these cases was set down for a public hearing by the Zoning Commission, and that happened back in July. Right now, we're in the additional public comment process, including the ANC open houses. We're also obviously happy to have other conversations with ANC Commission members or other members of the public who want to talk about the proposals. The Zoning Commission has set the public hearing dates for both of these cases, and we'll be going over that in a little bit more detail, but both of them are basically the last week of October. Next slide. I'm not going to spend time on this one. This is really just background information for you all. If you want to kind of get a better sense of what zoning is and how we use it in the district, what we're doing here obviously is amending the zoning regulations, changing them to apply throughout the city. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. Thanks.
So I'm going to talk about the rear additions case. And in this case, we're proposing to increase the size, the depth of a rear addition in the row house and the semi-detached zones. Next slide. So the case was set down in July, and the Zoning Commission asked that we continue the outreach, and we're heading into a public hearing in the next couple weeks on October 27th. Next slide, please. So what this proposal does is expand the current restriction, which is 10 feet as a matter of right rear addition. That 10 feet is measured from the rear of the adjoining properties. So as you can see on the left, that's a good example where the building in the middle with the gray roof can expand, put on a rear addition as a matter of right or by right, as long as it does not exceed 10 feet past the rear wall of one of the neighbors. And it's the furthest most impacted. So it can't be from the neighbor on the bottom, which is only 5 feet. It would be measured from the neighbor on the top, which is furthest setback. A rear addition more than 10 feet, as shown on the right side of the page, is still allowed, but it's by special exception and is required to go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. ANC's weigh in, neighbors are notified. So that's when it's more than the by right addition. Next slide. So the reason we started looking at this issue was as we were looking through comp plan language and language especially that focused on ADA and universal design. We started looking at the size of what a wheelchair accessible bedroom needed to be in order to facilitate wheelchair mobility. We also took into account the concerns raised by the Zoning Commission in the original case of 1411, which is now 10 years ago. So the universal design standards basically ended up with 5 feet around the beds. What you're looking at here in this drawing is a bed is in the center between A and C. A and C are measurements. A is 5 feet. The idea is to have 5 feet mobility around the bed. C is a smaller distance. It accounts for the piece of furniture. Anyway, a queen size bed, when we looked through the building codes, it ended up being an addition of 16 by 15 feet, would provide a matter of right. Next slide. So we looked at that, and we looked at the cases in front of the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And although we can't confirm that every addition is accommodating a bedroom in the back, we still thought it would be a reasonable amendment to allow for that situation that would accommodate a universally designed bedroom or addition, and that would increase the building rear addition from 10 feet to 16 feet. And that's drawn here in this image. The image on the left shows you 16 feet, image on the right shows you 10 feet. And as you can see, the distance is really not all that impactful. And if you think about the size of a grown man at 6 feet, it's just that, it's that marginal difference. Next slide. So an addition that is more than 6 feet, which is shown here, the house, the blue area, the house is gray, the blue area is the matter of right, the yellow area is more than 16 feet. That would be allowed by special exception, again, through a public hearing process. And what's important about this is the property would still have to meet the required rear yard minimum, which in most of these cases is 20 feet. It would still have to abide by the 60% lot occupancy requirement. It could not exceed building height and any of the other required zoning development standards. This is only that provision that would allow it for the matter of right. Next, please. So these are some examples of just how it would be applied. The example on the top, everybody shares pretty much a common rear wall. The addition could be 16 feet, more than 16 feet would be special exception. And again, it's respecting the 60% lot occupancy and the 20-foot rear yard. The example on the bottom shows where the existing house that wants the addition is already in excess of 16 feet. So there would be no matter of right rear addition. Any rear addition to the larger property would require special exception. So it's not a guaranteed. If there's already an addition or a building wall that exceeds the 16 feet, any addition would have to be by special exception. Next, please. So I'm available for any questions or comments. It's a pretty straightforward. Right now it's allowed at 10. We're proposing it to be 16. And I'm available for any questions or comments.
I had a comment.
Okay.
This is Ann Maladnoff from ANC 3A05.
Mhm.
We've gotten some questions about the 16-foot increase because it is more than 50% increase in the depth of the currently allowed matter of right rear addition. Did you do any analysis of the shadow effects on the adjoining yards that would be associated with that increase?
No, we did not, because, well, I don't know how high it would be, but no, we did not do any shadow.
And the text amendment would allow an addition to go up the full height that's allowed in that zone.
Full height of the building. Yes, ma'am.
That was a particular concern.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to think about the history of this addition. Prior to 2014, you could go back to the full 60% lot occupancy as a matter of right. And that was the case since 1958. And as we looked at all the pressures that were being put on the R4 at that time, the row house zones, one of the issues that came up during those public hearings was the issue of rear additions. And so we proposed, after a series of public hearings, limiting it to 10 feet without doing a lot of research in terms of what would that accommodate? How does that really function? And after 10 years, we looked at it again in light of the universal design. As I pointed out earlier, we looked at the amount of cases that were before the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and all of those which had been approved and had support of the ANC and the neighbors. And we found that if we extended it to 16 feet to accommodate the ADA, that it would also alleviate about 45% of the cases that were in front of the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and all of those cases, excuse me, were recommended for approval. So that's kind of how we got to where we got.
One more thought. I think that my neighborhood may have been one of the areas that spurred the earlier ZC 14-11 in 2014, because we had a very long rear addition just a couple of blocks from me, and it created a full height concrete wall back about 20 feet from the adjoining neighbor, directly to the south of the neighbor, and the effect on the yard, the patio, and the sun coming onto the rear wall, it just about blocked out all of the light.
Yeah, I remember the case you're describing. So and that was the impetus for looking at some kind of additional restriction. And I think that addition was actually closer to 35 feet. I mean, it went all the way.
Yes.
Maximized it. Yeah, and it was a solid concrete wall.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that did spur a lot of concern and continuing attention. And I think the idea of a full height addition also was a concern. If you had a universal bedroom, that would probably be on the first floor in order to allow a wheelchair to have access to it without an elevator. And a one-story rear addition of 16 feet would cause minimal effect on the light and shade or the privacy of the adjoining property. It's the 2.5 or 3-story additions where the real effect occurs. Did you think at all about having a provision that would be particularly focused on universal bedrooms?
We looked at provisions on how we could regulate height, how we could, if the addition were set back from adjoining properties 5 feet, because a lot of those row houses have that kind of dog leg often between them. How would that be? And then we were also struggling with, well, how would that be administered? And we also kind of thought about, okay, what is it? What does it take for some of these row houses to really accommodate a growing family, and creating that kind of space? So we did think of a lot of provisions. I think the one that we leaned on but didn't take forward the most was to allow, if you created some kind of dog leg and you respected that historic dog leg, that would be a matter of right.
Interesting. Thank you. I don't want to take up any more time. I appreciate it.
I believe I had a comment. I'm not sure whether you can see. This is Chuck Elkins.
Yes, Mr. Elkins, go ahead.
Maybe to continue part of Ann's comments and questions, it seems to me that in presenting this to the public, it's important to emphasize what neighbors are losing by having this a matter of right as opposed to a BZA thing. I think those of us who are in the ANC understand that, but up to a point. But it seems to me that, I think we're all in favor of people being able to get around in their wheelchair and having this kind of room. But I think it's a trade-off here for the neighbors, and it seems to me that needs to be made equally apparent by OP as well. And I guess I do sort of agree with the implication of Ann's comment about one story, because there is a big difference between a 1-story and a 3-story, let's say, addition of that sort. And all we're saying is that, all you're doing is basically saying it's a matter of right versus having to go to the BZA. There are cases, it seems to me there is a point where allowing neighbors to go to the BZA is an important aspect of zoning. And I guess the question is whether you've made the cut at the right point to balance those two. But I think that's a question which I would raise.
Mhm. Well, looking at the cases that over the last 10 years that have been in front of the BZA, we felt like we had made that appropriate cut at 16 feet. Because we think some of those that are even larger than 16 feet that went to the BZA because 10 feet didn't work, they're like, well, we may as well go for 20, or, there may be an incentive to stay at 16 feet rather than go back further. Because once you're in front of the BZA, you may as well go for broke. It's a lot of time and a lot of expense to get there. So that's what
But you did not notice a difference between a 1-story and a 2 or 3-story case in front of the BZA, or did you look at that?
Well, I did not look at that. No, we didn't.
I think that is an issue that you might want to take a look at. In terms of, those of us in the ANC try to, look for both the person who's trying to develop their house and do the right thing, but we're also looking at the impacts on neighbors, and that's part of our responsibility. And so we come at this trying to look both ways, and it seems to me OP, of course, I would argue, has the same obligation.
Sure. No, I agree with you there. So 1-story is a matter of right versus a second story. If the second story stayed at 10 feet, yeah, I could see something like that. Okay, I can look at that.
It might be useful, Jennifer, this is Anne again, just to mention the numbers of cases that you saw. It was a look at the last 3 years, I think you had in the set down report, and there were very few additions of between 10 and 16 feet. That wasn't a real peak time for real estate construction. I don't know if it was typical, but do you want to give the numbers that you had looked at?
I don't have those with me right now.
I think it was 16 total.
Okay. But I can have those. I can certainly have those for the hearing. Because we did look at the full 10 years. I think we chose the last 3 years because that seemed to be the bulk. But I can get all those numbers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, this is Joel. Any other questions regarding rear additions?
Yes, I have a quick question. My name is Carol Grunwald. I'm with ANC 34G. I missed the very beginning of this, so I just want to confirm that these changes pertain only to the R4 zone throughout the city. Is that correct?
It would also be to the R3. So attached zone. It would be for any attached or semi-detached. So duplexes and row houses.
So R3 is attached and
Yes.
and R4 is row house?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't the language all R and RF row homes?
Yes, any
And
semi-detached or row house.
Yeah. So we have some that are not in specifically row home zones, but they are attached on both sides, row homes, and then quite a few semi-detached.
Yeah. And
in R2.
This would apply to those as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's a difference. I have a question too, please.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Hi, I'm Liz Nagy and also an ANC 34G. I'm trying to understand. The impetus for this change is to provide universal design in row houses.
It was
semi-detached homes, because I'm wondering. Is this a solution in search of a problem? Do we have that many houses, not houses that aren't suited for universal design? We live in a city with lots of old houses. I got that, but we're taking away people's, the neighbors' ability to weigh in on what happens right next door to them, because there's a perception that we need universal design throughout the city. And I will also say I used to do disability rights, so I'm in favor of universal design, and I'm in favor of people with disabilities having access to whatever they need. But I'm just trying to understand how this got set up.
Well, the comprehensive plan calls out for zoning changes to accommodate universal design. So that's what started it. Then we started looking also at the volume of cases in front of the Board of Zoning Adjustment and the amount of time it takes and the burden it puts on. And so on both the community and the property owner who's trying to put on the addition. And so that's how we kind of came to this and to this particular case. So it's both a combination of removing barriers to housing. We didn't find the 6 feet when I think about, 6 feet as being that egregious. A property owner would still have a right to weigh in if it's more than 6 feet. So a total of 16 feet, then there would still be the opportunity to weigh in. But
Go ahead.
That's where it came
I'm
from.
sorry.
Well, it's just, there's mayor's orders for agencies to look at ways to remove barriers to housing. And this was one of, also fit within that particular order.
But it also, I understand what the marching orders of this mayor's administration are. But I would also say that you're actually impinging on the rights of homeowners adjacent to these houses. And I especially appreciated the comment about the concern of going up. So what ends up happening now, if you're not building a 1-story addition as a matter of right, you could be building a 2 or 3-story addition as a matter of right. Your neighbors have no say at all in it. Their property is likely to be very much affected, and they had no opportunity for input into any of that. And I also have a concomitant concern that we keep taking away green space in the city. You push back 6 feet. I get it, not terrible. But you add that up over other row houses and other semi-detached, and eventually you've taken away quite a bit of green space. It's a trade-off. I get that. I do think the more particular concern is the building up, because I have friends who live in Adams Morgan, for example, and whose properties have been greatly affected by pop-ups in the back of other houses.
Well, a great deal of Adams Morgan is actually zoned for apartments, and so there is that kind of uncontrolled. But I hear everybody's point about the second and third floor or stories, and we can take a look at limiting, allowing a by right addition on the ground floor and a special exception if it's more than 10 feet on the second and third floor.
I think that would be great if you would look at that and implement that. I think that would be a really great start.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
Thank you for being willing to look at that. I hope it makes it in.
Okay.
So that would be worth commenting on for ANC members, sending
Right.
comments to the BZA, to the zoning commission.
Yeah, it actually would very much, because if we'll be summarizing these meetings in our reports to the zoning commission, so it'd be nice for you guys to confirm.
Yeah, thank
these
you. Point
amendments.
taken.
Okay.
It's a great idea. Thank you, Anne. And Jennifer, both.
Sorry, I think we probably have time for one more comment. Commissioner, oh, sorry, I went on mute for a second. Commissioner Henchman, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes, from 5F. I've pulled up the set down report on this, and so you have the analysis of cases since 2016, so the last 10 years. And what it states is based on a review of cases, 16 of the additions were 16 feet or less. All of the cases were approved and all had support from ANC. So I just clarifying, I understand this. Every case that's gone to BZA to ask for the relief that you're describing here was granted at 100% of the time. So, I mean, if that's the case, it's not so much a solution in search of a problem, but an objection in search of a reason from the people who are concerned about this. If and going through BZA is expensive and time consuming for everybody involved. And if this is just a thing where, I'm glad you guys are doing this process. If BZA has had to do this 16 times in a row and it keeps granting it, why are we all going through the motions? Why shouldn't this be in the regs? But am I misunderstanding that?
I think that little chart was only for the last 3 years, even though, as Jennifer said, they looked at 10 years. Is that right, Jennifer? Or
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did not go back and check the report. I can check it again. We did do a full survey of the last 10 years, but I'm not sure what made it into the report.
one of the things that's interesting to me, and I know, Joel, you want to move on, but people often do look at what kind of addition would be possible as a matter of right, so they don't have to go through a zoning procedure. And in my neighborhood, they are much more likely to propose an addition up to 10 feet or whatever the matter of right is for that reason. So we don't have an idea of what might have been done if 16 feet had been the limit. That's very common in my area. So it's really hard to tell what the effect might be. We have a lot of people who would be very happy to add a bedroom on the second and third floor in the rear at the same time that they get the chance to build out on the first floor, not for a universal bedroom, but just to expand the space in their existing home. And if they had now the right to go to 16 feet, there would be more of those that go out all the way to 16 feet. It wouldn't help the universal bedroom construction of universal bedrooms. It would just allow a bigger addition without review. So I think looking at those numbers of what was proposed is not a good indicator of what could be proposed.
Okay, well, I appreciate all the feedback.
Thank you.
Josh, do you want to move on, please? Next slide.
Sure.
Joel?
Sorry, my screen wasn't working there for a second. Sorry about that. I did see one or two more hands up to contribute to that conversation. We'd be happy to receive those comments, or if you want to add comments to the chat, that would be helpful as well, and we may be able to respond to them. But once again, thanks for all of your input so far. So thanks, Jennifer. Now we're going to talk about the Omnibus text amendment. This is going to take a while, so I'll probably kind of try to keep things moving right along. Next slide, please. So OP is proposing through the Omnibus text amendment a series of kind of discrete text amendments, all part of this one case. This is to facilitate the review by the Zoning Commission, by you all, and by members of the public. Each one of these amendments, most of these tend to be citywide, as you'll see, and they're all intended to address kind of a number of specific kind of intent statements related to the zoning regulations. Much of this has come from the comprehensive plan, which is where all direction related to zoning comes from. And the comp plan calls for adding clarity to the zoning regulations to remove unnecessary barriers to housing, and particularly the provision of lower cost housing, to ease administrative burdens for homeowners, as well as for the BZA, and actually for ANCs as well. And finally, of course, to staff in administering the regulations. And of course, the whole goal of this is to update the 2016 zoning regulations that were approved and have been in place now for some time and are in constant need of kind of updating. Next slide. To prepare these amendments, we worked very closely with the Zoning Administrator's Office and the Department of Buildings. They've been very helpful in discussing with us how to make the regulations clearer and easier for people and staff to use. We also consulted with people in the Office of Zoning, Department of Transportation, Energy and Environment, Parks and Recreation, and others on these proposals. A lot of them are actually based on changes that were proposed by Zoning Commission and BZA members themselves, but other ones came from staff members, from ANC commissioners such as yourself, and from community and business groups and individuals throughout the city. As Jennifer mentioned in the last case, we also looked at past BZA cases, typically going back to the adoption of the current 2016 zoning regulations, so about 10 years now. And in some cases, we did look at what surrounding jurisdictions do just to help us kind of refine some of the proposals. Some of you may have attended the ANC open houses held in June, and we were able to incorporate some of the comments from that meeting into the proposal already, and we'll get into that as we kind of get into the individual proposals. Next slide. Very quickly, so the Zoning Commission has set this case down for a public hearing as well. And we've continued to work on refining the text amendments since then. There have not been significant changes other than the few that there's not been a lot of significant changes. There have been some relatively minor changes, and we'll go over those as we kind of go through the presentation. I'm going to be going through these at a fairly high level and talking about the more substantive changes, but often they also include things like technical corrections or clarifications that do not result in any kind of significant change to the regulation itself. But all of those, even though I'm going to be talking at a fairly high level, all of the details are in our set down report, which is available on the Office of Planning website, as well as on the Office of Zoning website for this case. And just to prepare you, we'll also be breaking every few topics throughout the presentation for you to ask questions or make comments. This is similar to how the proposals will be heard by the Zoning Commission at the public hearing, which is scheduled for October 30th. But if you did attend one of the earlier June meetings, honestly, this presentation is going to look pretty familiar to you. Next slide. So this is the first group that I'm going to talk about. Next slide. The first is a pretty technical one, and it deals with properties that are split zone, properties that have more than one zone on them. Typically, the zone boundary line does run down the center line of streets or alleys or along property lines, but occasionally the zoning boundary line does run through the middle of properties. It is certainly current practice to avoid the creation of new split zone properties, but there's certainly many that exist throughout the city. Sometimes a building can be constructed using these different zones, and there's not an issue with the fact that it's split zone, but sometimes that's difficult or even not possible to do. And this provision, the provision from the existing zoning regulations, is intended to help determine permitted building bulk, building density, and the range of uses that are permitted on the various zones that the property is zoned. However, over time, we've realized that some clarity in the provision is needed. This is particularly the case in how to apply zoning regulations on a split zone lot where one of the zones is low density residential. This is actually fairly common, such as, the R1 through RF zones. That could be particularly difficult to interpret. Next slide. So it's sometimes easiest to explain by using an example. So in this example of a property that is split zone, MU4, which is a low to moderate density mixed use zone, is the less restrictive or more permissive zone. And R2, which is a low density residential zone, is the more restrictive of the two. The existing regulations first establish a by right process for allowing the transfer of some density from the more restrictive R2 zone to the less restrictive MU4 zone. The building bulk allowed in the MU4 portion can't be extended into the R2 portion. Rather, the R2 portion may only be used for required setbacks, open space, or parking for the building. But the regulations also provide for a special exception process that is just a little bit more permissive, although it is particularly unclear in terms of how it's supposed to be administered. The special exception process allows a bit of the use and density on the less restrictive MU4 portion to be used on the more restrictive R2 portion, and that's limited to the first 35 feet of the property within the R2 zone portion of the property. Anything beyond this requires a variance, of which we have seen some, not many, but we are not proposing to change that. Next slide to get into some more illustrations. So these illustrations try to show both the by right and the special exception permissions. OP's proposal is to mainly provide clarity to the existing provisions, but also to provide a little bit more flexibility in terms of the amount of density from the R2 zone portion that can be used on the MU4 zone portion. We're not really proposing to change the special exception process other than to provide a bit of additional clarity. Last but not least, we're also proposing to move the entire provision from subtitle A, which is a more administrative subtitle, to subtitle Z, which provides rules that apply generally throughout the city, which we think this qualifies for. And that's it for that one. Next slide. Subtitle A of the zoning regulations also provides a description of what kind of flexibility the zoning administrator has as part of the building permit process. The existing regulations provide this for both by right projects and for ones subject to zoning commission and BZA orders. The existing wording has resulted in administrative problems and delays to homeowners in permitting, particularly with respect to properties that are subject to a BZA approval. As all of you know, BZA approvals are not approval of a project as such. They're approval of specific amounts of relief from specific amounts of the zone, from specific provisions of the zoning regulations. Typically, the plans prepared for a BZ case, therefore, are not really final construction drawing sets, and some level of refinement and alteration of the plans is common as the more detailed building and permit plans are prepared. People want to get the approval from the BZA before they go to the expense, which can be considerable, of preparing final construction drawings. The uncertainty in the zoning administrator flexibility can result in additional and unnecessary delays and expense to homeowners and businesses. And the intent is simply to provide some clarity to that flexibility. we're not really changing very much, but some of the wording changes that we're proposing will make it clear to people, including the zoning administrator herself, what flexibility is permitted and what is not. And finally, we're also proposing to add front setback to the standard zoning commission zoning administrator flexibility. The zoning administrator currently has flexibility regarding rear yard and side yard regulations. For some reason, front setback is not included in that, so we're proposing to add that as part of this text amendment. Next slide. And the last of this grouping deals with light poles for recreation facilities in residential zones. Currently, light poles and standards for recreation and play fields are not specifically regulated in zoning regulations. This has led to some uncertainty and has limited the ability of district agencies such as DPR to provide for evening use of these desired resources, which are uses for district residents. A light pole is currently allowed to a height of 90 feet if it's set back from a property line by a distance equal to its height. Providing the setback, however, for recreation fields can often be difficult to make siting or the size of the recreation facility itself difficult to achieve. This proposal is specifically to regulate and allow light standards to this height for athletic, recreation, and play fields on district-owned properties. That'd be public schools, recreation centers, and parks. And this would be able to be provided without the setback, but would maintain the 90-foot height limit. Department of Parks and Recreation guidelines, which are currently in place outside of zoning for the design, placement, and height and orientation of such light poles, generally intended to ensure adequate illumination of the play field for safety of the players, but also to minimize light spill onto adjacent properties. Those standards would continue to apply and, of course, would be unchanged as part of the zoning process. And no changes proposed for university or private school campuses because those are regulated through a separate BZA process for those uses. Next slide. And this is our first break. If you have any questions on one of those three proposals. Okay, hearing none. And by the way, if you do think of a question later, feel free to put it in the chat once again, or feel free just to send it to me. We'll be showing our email addresses and stuff towards the end of this presentation, and we'd be happy to receive additional comments later on. Thanks. Joshua, next slide. This is the group we're going to talk about now, which mainly deals with balconies and decks. Next slide. The first is balconies and gross floor area, which determines the square footage of the building that is permitted. Currently, an inset balcony, which is one which is inset into a building from the exterior building facade, so it's enclosed on three sides, but open on one side. They currently typically count towards the building floor area ratio. OP's received many requests from architects, developers, as well as members of the Zoning Commission in particular, to provide additional flexibility in the regulations for balconies. Balconies, of course, can provide valuable and highly valued amenity space for residents and occupants of buildings and can help to provide additional facade articulation for the buildings themselves. OP had originally proposed to exempt inset balconies from FAR to a depth of 6 feet and maintain the existing exemption for external balconies of 6 feet in depth. However, there were comments made by ANC members at the earlier open houses that 8 feet would be a more usable amount for the residents of these buildings and would allow for additional outdoor space. So the current proposal reflects that input, and we are now proposing an exemption for 8 feet. Next slide. Balconies that extend out from the building also count towards building lot occupancy. This can serve as a pretty significant disincentive to the provision of balconies, in that either relief would have to be obtained for lot occupancy, or the building would have to be made smaller to accommodate those external decks. Again, the zoning commission members in particular, but also designers, some ANCs, and members of the public have advocated for applicants to be able to provide more balconies, again, as an amenity for future occupants and to add articulation. And so OP is now proposing to exempt balconies of to keep the amount the same, balconies of up to 8 feet in depth from the lot occupancy for that property. Next slide. And the last of the three deals with ground floor decks and lot occupancy. This might actually be one of the more consequential changes being proposed in the omnibus. And this is also the one that the Zoning Commission and the Board of Zoning Adjustment, as well as many homeowners, have asked for most often and for the longest period of time. Currently, uncovered porches and decks that are less than 4 feet above the ground below at any point do not count towards lot occupancy now. So you can have a deck as large as you want, and it doesn't count towards lot occupancy. So if you're lucky enough to have a flat lot, chances are you can construct your deck by right. Decks of more than 4 feet above grade, however, including ones that are still off the main or ground floor of the building, do count towards lot occupancy in the ZR16 regulations. Even on mildly sloping lots, this can be an issue, and requests for BZA lot occupancy relief are very common, probably the most common form of relief that we see. We documented well over 100 BZA cases since 2016. We did that analysis back in like March and April of this year. There have been many more cases since that time as well. Most of these deck cases were for relatively modest sized decks. Many were special exception, but others, especially on very small lots, required variance relief. Virtually all of those received OP and ANC support and were approved. However, I would note that more recently, there have been some BZA requests for reasonably sized decks off the back of a small house on small lots, which required variance relief, and they've been denied. And the BZA has reiterated as part of their discussion that it's been denied because of the wording of the regulation itself, and that this situation requires an amendment to the zoning regulations, which is what we're doing right now. Next slide. So this slide shows an illustration with a pretty mildly sloping lot and why the deck becomes counted towards lot occupancy in the current regulations. We're proposing to exempt 200 square feet of open uncovered deck from the lot occupancy calculation, provided that it's located off the main or ground level of the house. This would allow this amenity clearly desired by homeowners. And it would certainly significantly reduce the cases that would require BZA relief. We estimated probably at least 3/4, probably more than that, of the past cases would be permitted by right. And the remaining cases would tend to be special exception by variance. A number of them, kind of raise a point that was raised by a commissioner earlier tonight, were close enough to the permitted amount that we're proposing that they probably would be done as a conforming deck. In other words, reduced in size to be conforming to the regulation rather than go through the BZA process. And once again, decks above the main level, decks off the second or third level of a house would not receive this exemption. They'd be required to meet this. And of course, the existing provisions related to lot occupancy and rear yard would also remain. So any deck would have to conform to those provisions as well or seek relief. Next slide. And here's where we break for questions, comments, or thoughts again. Commissioner Elkins.
You may have said this, but on the last one, the deck, what if it's covered? If it's a covered deck, it has a roof, is it still allowed to not count?
It would not be allowed. This was the provision that we brought forward is for uncovered decks only.
That's good. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Great. In that case, we'll move on to the next slide, Joshua. This is the next grouping, which is a grouping of two, just to break things up a little bit. Next slide. This is one that's almost hard to explain, but I'm going to try, and you may have questions about it. This deals with a lot frontage requirement, which applies only to new subdivisions for multifamily buildings or apartment buildings. Now, lot frontage is the amount of property, is the length of the property directly along a street. And that's different from the defined lot width, which can be under the zoning regulations measured differently. So lot frontage is the amount of your property that fronts on a street. As shown in the diagram, for a square or rectangular lot, width and frontage would be the same. But for an irregular lot, such as the other ones on this slide, these two measurements would be different. Zoning requires a lot frontage of 30 feet minimum for any new property subdivision for multifamily use. It's not required for other provisions. It's just for that one particular instance. But this would actually include a consolidation under the provisions. If you consolidate two lots into one, that's actually technically called a subdivision. So it would apply in a situation like that. And it also applies in the instance of a conversion of an existing tax lot to a record lot. And this lot frontage requirement again does not apply to multifamily development on any existing record lot, just for the creation of a new record lot. Next slide. So OP is proposing to amend this requirement to change where the 30-foot frontage requirement would apply to remove some of the instances where it makes less sense. So we're proposing to clarify that it would not be applied to the conversion of a tax lot created prior to 1958 to a record lot. Or to a lot where the existing building is converted to a small multifamily building in the RF zones as intended and permitted in that zone by special exception. So that process tends to go through a special exception anyways. So you go through the special exception process for the conversion and not so much for the change in your property from a tax lot to a record lot, which is actually a fairly common occurrence. Finally, for those instances where it would be required, we want to clarify the regulations that special exception relief would be permitted. Next slide. Totally unrelated to the last one is green area ratio. And a small amendment to the green area ratio provisions. Green area ratio, in case you haven't run across it, is a relatively recent zoning provision. It addresses environmental building and site design. A lot of it is intended to address stormwater management. It came into effect around the time of the 2016 regulations. And at the time, there were not a lot of stormwater management regulations outside of zoning. And so we instituted this to put it in place. It was pretty forward thinking at the time. We were pretty much the first location in the country to have something like a green area ratio that applied broadly throughout the city. However, there is one issue that has come up and that's that with the current GAR regulations or provisions, they require GAR review for projects that are for interior renovations of a building only, ones that involve little to no substantive external modifications to the buildings. So we feel this is not consistent with either the description or stated purpose of GAR, and it can actually result in really lengthy and potentially very expensive administrative burden for applicants and for our review staff as they go through the GAR for a project where there's no changes to the outside of the building being proposed. So we're proposing to amend that to clarify the regulations such that interior alterations only would not trigger IZ. We're continuing discussions with DOE about this provision and the exact wording of that provision. Excuse me. But as part of those talks with DOEE, their staff also raised a few other technical issues to address, how GAR is calculated on split zone lots, and an amendment to the list of certified landscape experts that can do the GAR certification. Next slide. And any questions on these two proposed amendments? Okay, thanks. Hearing none and having had a chance to take a drink of water for my throat, I think we'll move on to the next slide, Joshua. This is a pretty big one. So we'll go through this one. The next four deal with various aspects of vehicle parking in the district. Next slide. The first one is one that has already raised some questions, and so interested in hearing your thoughts on this one. In the ZR16 regulations, the current version of the zoning regulations, the parking requirements for many zones and types of zones were reduced from the ZR58 or former zoning regulations. There was, as you can imagine, a great deal of discussion about this at the time. There was also a great deal of analysis done by DDOT and OP of parking needs and parking trends that led to the current parking requirements. However, the regulations also include provisions that require parking spaces provided under the old regulations to be retained, requiring that they be retained, even if the ZR16 level for the use or the building was reduced. Now, this is pretty unique in zoning. Typically, the zoning regulations require conformity to the current regulations and not to former ones. So this is pretty much a one-off in our zoning regulations. OP is proposing to remove those requirements for conformity to the 1958 regulations. This can limit options for updating buildings, including things like conversions of non-residential buildings to residential buildings, or for the conversion of underutilized parking for the conversion of underutilized parking to other uses, which could include, additional green space on the property or other uses within the building if the parking is within the building. As I said, this has already caused some conversation, and so I'm looking forward to hearing what you might think about this provision. Next slide. The second proposal we're proposing is more of a technical change. The ZR16 zoning amendments included an approval of reductions in required parking for sites that are within a half mile of a metro station or a quarter mile of a streetcar line, or within a quarter mile of a priority bus corridor, priority metro bus route. At the time, it was noted that these priority bus routes could evolve over time and that the corridors and routes listed in the regulations would likely need to be updated. Fast forward 9 years to today, and WMATA has now implemented a new high-frequency bus corridor network intended to further address access to frequent bus service with increased evening and weekend service along heavily used routes. This came into effect a few months ago in June, so the timing for the zoning update is right. Next slide. I know these maps and the text is really small. Again, I'm not going to go over it in a lot of detail, but these are provided in case you want to open up the presentation and see this in more detail. But the map shows the new WMATA routes in red and the former WMATA routes in light blue. And then the listing on the side is the new routes themselves. So not going to go into a lot more detail on this map, other than, again, to make sure that you understand that it's there and that you can take a look at it once the presentation is over. As you can see, though, many of the routes overlap between the old WMATA routes and the current WMATA routes. Next slide. The second map shows the areas hatched, including ones around metro stations, streetcar lines, and the parking reduction, and how they would change under the current proposal. The small areas in pink are ones where the parking reduction currently applies, but would not apply under the under the existing new routes, while the areas in green would be new areas where the provision would now apply. As is currently the case, the developer, of course, can choose to provide more parking than required if they feel that the demand for that parking exists. And of course, the parking reduction currently does not apply in the R and RF zones, and OP is not proposing to change that. Next slide. A couple of much smaller ones here. This current one is a bit of an odd provision for parking spaces located within a building or structure. The entrance must be set back at least 12 feet from the center line of the adjacent alley, not the building, but the entrance. And the garage entrance has to have a minimum height of 10 feet. In the 1958 regulations, these requirements were there, but they applied only to much larger garages serving multiple vehicles like an apartment building or an office building, but they did not apply to a garage for low-density residential zones or properties. In ZR16, this provision was moved and I think inadvertently applied to all parking structures, including the garage at the back of a house or a flat. This has actually led to a number of BZA cases for relief from these provisions, although I think in many cases they simply haven't been applied in the past. We're simply proposing to specifically exempt parking garages for houses and flats from this requirement. It would remain in place for larger parking garages where it actually does make much more sense. And the last one for this group. Next slide. The zoning regulations require screening for surface parking lots. But again, like the last one, in the translation of the old zoning regs to the new ones in 2016, this screening requirement was inadvertently worded so that it can be interpreted that screening is required even along the alley where the parking spaces are accessed directly from that alley, as in the diagram showed here. This kind of parking with access directly from the alley is pretty common for smaller buildings in particular, with a small number of parking spaces, and is actually a pretty efficient way to provide on-site parking while minimizing the amount of on-site driveway pavement and disturbance. Once again, a number of BZA cases have been filed for relief from this case, about 9 or 10. All of them were approved with no opposition. OP's proposing to amend the screening requirement to simply not require it along the alley in this situation. Screening around the remainder of the surface parking area would remain required. And with that, we'll break for questions. And I see Commissioner Hinchman, you have your hand up already.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Joe Benjamin, ANC 5F. On number 10, if you wouldn't mind going back to that map, just so I could explain. Yes, that one. Thank you. One of the areas being removed between the old map and the new map is Rhode Island Avenue west of the metro station, which surprised me because we had a bus every 10 minutes. We still have a bus every 10 minutes. So I don't know why we're not included in WMATA's map of having bus service better than every 12 minutes. But I looked into it, and what I think happened is we used to have one bus every 10 minutes, and now we have two buses with slightly different service patterns that overlap west of the metro station, but each of those different service patterns are 20 minutes. So together they combine to 10-minute service, but I think that's why we were left out of the WMATA map, even though we do have high frequency bus service on Rhode Island Avenue. So that's also the case, by the way, on 14th Street and on Independence, which are also two other segments on here. So I'd really love to see OP restore those segments because we still do have high frequency bus service. It just is accomplished through two different service patterns of one route that ended up getting left off the WMATA map for some reason.
Thanks, Commissioner. And actually, I did see your comment that you had supplied earlier. So I actually just had a conversation with DDOT this morning on, kind of updating them on the omnibus, and they kind of raised the same kind of question about some of the routes that were no longer on the WMATA map. So I'm going to continue some conversations with DDOT to see what might be appropriate and how we might phrase that with the zoning commission. I'm not 100, just for full disclosure, I'm not 100% sure that's going to be all resolved before OP files its public hearing report. And that will be kind of towards the end of this month. But I am happy to have to kind of take up those conversations with DDOT and see what we can do. It's a
I
good
appreciate
comment.
it. Yeah, I know. Whether we're on the map or not, that's not, for WMATA and for DDOT, that's maybe less important. I mean, we have the service, that's what's important. But like, as you're going to start code, because the proposed reg isn't codifying, whatever's on the map, it's codifying specific segments. So I'm hopeful that that at least could be done before then, so that we're not downgraded, so to speak, in the zoning regs.
Got it. Thank you.
To pick up on Commissioner Henchman's excellent points there, this is Ann Mladinov in ANC 3A. When the initial ZR16 was adopted, we noticed that there was a specific list of priority corridors, even though WMATA was working on increasing service on other corridors. And we suggested at the time that perhaps it could be written in a way that would be more flexible. Now we have an additional situation where WMATA has its visionary network that includes some additional routes that would have higher frequency bus service. I wonder if it would be possible to write something into the language that refers to the frequency of service so that you could keep up with the changing times and wouldn't have to do a text amendment every time WMATA changes.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I know this was definitely discussed as part of the ZR16 amendments. What we kind of run up against is, making sure that, because this is kind of an important consideration to property owners, obviously, what their parking requirement would be. It needs to be easily understood and needs to be enforceable. There would be problems with establishing I think there would be problems with wording it that way in terms of its administratability, I guess. I do think that we in the Office of Planning can probably do a better job of kind of monitoring the situation and bringing forward amendments to the zoning regulations more regularly And just thinking off the top of my head, which I should never do, maybe we could put something in the zoning regulations that establishes something like this as more of a technical change, which would allow the change to happen more easily and more quickly with kind of less of a process that would make it easier to make sure that the regulations remain kind of up to date.
That's a good point. Another thing some regulators do is to specify that an agency will adopt an annual list, or they'll refer to that list by name in the regulation. And so everybody will have a source that's updated, say, every January 1st or every fiscal year. But the agency responsible can, like DDOT, can provide that list every year, and it doesn't have to go through a text amendment or other change in the zoning body. Just a thought.
Got it. Thank you. I've written that one down. Commissioner Elkin?
I represent ANC 3D, and you may have heard this from my colleagues already, but this relates to a prior one. Was it number 9 or number 8, having to do with the parking regulations back from 1958 versus the more current regulations. I assume that the new regulations, the 2016 ones, were put in place with the thought that transportation has been greatly improved in the district, and therefore we can reduce the parking requirements. And I think that makes sense generally. Unfortunately, ANC 3D, which includes the Palisades, Spring Valley, and Wesley Heights, is sort of a transportation desert with regard to any of these priority bus corridors. And we feel that at least that this kind of sticking with the 58 regs should be tied to transportation availability and not just sort of removed entirely across the city. So you'll be hearing more sophisticated comments than I've just given from ANC 3D, because we think a uniform approach across the city, if it's really based on transportation availability, doesn't really fit our situation.
Great, thank you. Of course, in 2016, excuse me, sorry, in 2016, you're correct that certainly some of the rationale for the changes in parking certainly was related to the additional options that were available to people. It was also, though, related to just changes in car ownership patterns. Over the time, we saw many more households that choose to be car free. And we were seeing buildings being built with parking that was underutilized. So it was based on more than just a transportation network. But your point about areas where there aren't as many transportation options is a good one. It's certainly one of the reasons why areas like Palisades would not be eligible for the parking reduction for proximity to transportation route. Commissioner Goslin?
Yeah, just weighing behind Chuck Elkin's comment. Another transportation desert, very evident looking at this map, is our ANC 34G, Chevy Chase, Barnaby Woods, Hawthorne. And I suspect, although I don't want to relitigate 2016, that the change in auto ownership and carless households was a central city and not in our area, most of which requires a car to navigate. But I mean,
No,
if there's some way to cope with this issue, and I guess the way you're coping with it is that we're not going to be eligible or have imposed on us, depending on your point of view, the parking reductions that go with being near a high intensity corridor.
Yeah, we're certainly not proposing to change in any way the parking requirements for the low density zones. I know that not all of 3,4G is zoned low density, but certainly a great portion of it is, and those requirements would remain exactly the same. They would be unchanged through this omnibus proposal.
I have one follow-up question real quickly. Is there a way to, are there data that show what the what the car ownership is in various parts of the city in terms of census tract or whatever? Is that kind of information available?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I suspect that if that data exists, it would exist with DDOT, and I'm certainly happy to reach out to DDOT to see if that information exists. I'm trying to remember whether the DC State Data Center, like whether the census data addresses car ownership, and to be honest, I don't remember.
It does.
Pardon me, sorry.
I believe that it does in the American Community Survey.
There we go. So, I can certainly reach out to the state data center about that question, or as I said, DDOT may already be using that data to compile that information. I don't know.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions on this grouping? If not, I'm just looking at the time. I think we'll move on. Joshua, and we will go back to, I think, slide 42. Yes, okay, now we're caught up. Okay, this is the next grouping. Yeah, sorry, Josh, we can go to 43. Next slide. So we're going to get into a couple more kind of technical ones here. This one certainly falls into that category. Just very quickly, the penthouse regulations. The penthouse, by the way, is that bit of building that's allowed on top of the roof of the structure. Excuse me, it's often mechanical space, but recent changes, relatively recent changes, they happened actually over a decade ago now, allowed different forms of habitable space also up in the penthouse, and those are now reflected into zoning. When we adopted those changes, the commission into zoning, the commission established requirements for the provision of habitable space, affordable housing for a habitable space in the penthouse space. And that would either be the inclusion of IZ units within the building or providing a contribution to our Housing Production Trust Fund. And the amount of that is based on the size of the penthouse space devoted to generally uses that generate revenue. We did find, or in conversations with Department of Buildings and some property owners, we found that there is a need for additional clarity for how to calculate what space is included in that calculation of affordable housing and what space is not included in that calculation. The regulations currently include very specific language for how to do the calculation. It's based on land area, land value, as well as total gross floor area of the habitable space. But additional clarity is needed, particularly for some of the service spaces, such as stairwells and elevator overrides. This lack of clarity has actually led to a lot of uncertainty, as well as delays and complications in the permitting process. So our proposal is to simply provide some clarification. Next slide. So in general, these diagrams show different scenarios for penthouse space. The light gray is the building below, and the darker gray is the penthouse space itself, which, as you can see, is required to be set back from the edge of the roof. So they're intended to show which portions of the penthouse space count towards an affordable housing contribution in different scenarios. It does vary, as you can see here, depending on the type of use and the type of space within the penthouse, as noted in these tables. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Sure.
Please. Thank you, Joel.
If you can go back.
The previous
Go
slide.
back, Joshua.
Thank you. I don't know that I need the slide to ask this question, but the question is, did I hear you say that this is about which parts of the space count toward affordable housing?
It almost. This is about which portions of the penthouse count towards the calculation of how much affordable housing you need to provide within the building, or how much your contribution would be to the Housing Production Trust Fund. So if you're a residential building, typically the affordable housing would be provided within the building itself as an IZ unit. So the calculation would be how much space has to be set aside as an affordable housing unit. If you're a non-residential building, which is also common, then this provision would clarify how much of your penthouse space counts towards your Housing Production Trust Fund calculation. I don't know if that's clear.
It's sort of. I mean, what's the expression? Clear as mud. But that's my fault, not yours. I'll puzzle this out. I may have more questions later.
Okay, and I'm certainly happy. I'm certainly happy to have a separate conversation with you if you want to sort this one out. The table does say that, for example, on a residential building, if you put residential units up on the penthouse, that counts towards your IZ requirement. As exists in the current regulations, if you provide amenity space for the residents, something like a lounge area or a communal kind of recreation space, the current regulations do not require an affordable housing contribution for space like that.
Okay,
so that's what the table is intended to kind of parse out. By the way, the term service spaces on these tables really mainly apply to elevators and stairwell overrides.
So the point of the slide is to say that the current system discourages IZ.
Not really. The current system is just simply unclear about how to do that calculation. We're proposing to provide that clarity. What's in the tables is generally consistent with how the provisions are being applied right now, but they'd be more clearly stated in the zoning regulations so that everybody has a clear understanding up front about what the situation is.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for the question. Next slide. This one also deals with inclusionary zoning. As the ANC commissioners, you of course are all aware of our inclusionary zoning program, which requires the provision of dedicated moderate income housing as part of any new development, certainly any new development more than 10 dwelling units, in return for a bonus density, a height, or lot occupancy within the building that you're proposing to build. But there's also a provision, and that's, by the way, required. That's required for any building of 10 units or more. There's also a provision that allows somebody to opt into the IZ program for smaller developments, ones that would not provide 10 units. So you can opt into the IZ program and obtain the IZ bonus, but in return for that, you'd have to provide an IZ unit or IZ units within the building. In most zones, this opt-in process is completely by right, but in the current regulations, it's only permitted by special exception in the lower density zones. And the bonuses are also available only by special exception. We're simply proposing to amend the regulations to remove the special exception requirement to allow the affordable housing provisions to be used by right in various zones. I should also note that we have a separate text amendment moving forward that you'll be hearing more about soon. We've already had open houses on that one, but there'll be some more where a similar thing is being proposed in the RA1 or low density apartment residential zones. Next slide. So this one shows specifically what the existing regulations are, what is permitted under mandatory IZ, in other words, if you have 10 units or more, and what the regulations are for a voluntary IZ or ones with less than 10 units are. Currently, so you can see that we're really not proposing to change the numbers of what you can do. We're simply proposing that it be allowed by right as opposed to by special exception to address all of the policy regulations regarding the provision of affordable housing in all parts of the city. Next slide. This one's a little bit different from the last two in that it's not related to IZ, but it does deal with front yard requirements. And we think it's pretty simple. In the low density R and RF residential zones, there's an inclusion of a front setback requirement. Unlike things like rear yard or side yard, which are very specific, a 20-foot rear yard, an 8-foot side yard, the front setback requirement is based on the prevailing existing front setback along the block. That's what makes this different from a rear yard or a side yard. And it applies in our R and RF residential zones. Because it's a setback and not a yard, someone wanting to request relief from the provision can't use the normal special exception process, but rather has to apply for relief through the much more difficult variance process. And there have been a number of cases where this has happened. In this case, we're not proposing to change the requirement itself. Simply, we're proposing to change it from to allow special exception relief from this provision rather than require variance. Next slide. And here's where we break for a few more questions if anybody has any.
I had a question
Oh,
about
sure.
the last proposal. Would the standards for special exception be similar to a special exception for other changes, that it would be compatibility with the neighborhood, consistent with the zoning requirements, wouldn't have an adverse effect on the neighboring air, light, and privacy, something like that?
Yes, it would use the typical special exception relief standards. They're spelled out in subtitle X. And those are the standards that deal with exactly the things that you're talking about.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I'm going to get your last name wrong. I'm sorry. Ruckauer?
Ruckauer. Yeah, so I have a question. It's not necessarily part of this particular process, but it's something that it's related to the IZ process. Currently, there is nothing that requires conversions from commercial office buildings to residential in the D zones to have any kind of IZ. And it's something that a lot of us have kicked around at various times, and we consider it a kind of like it's almost like a negation of IZ, because you've got these buildings that are putting in quite a few units, but they're all market rate, and there's nothing about IZ. We realize that there are no like bonus incentives, but could we look at making IZ mandatory in the D zones, whether it has a bonus or not?
Great question. Certainly not something that we're dealing with as part of the omnibus. I'm not the IZ expert here at here at OP, but I think that you raised the main issue yourself. The IZ program is specifically intended to require IZ units in return for the bonuses that can be achieved through IZ. That doesn't exist for conversions. And in fact, in many conversion projects, because of the nature of the buildings, people are losing square footage rather than gaining square footage. People are having to carve out portions of buildings to provide access to light and air, which is different from requirements for an office building. I think the other aspect that I would raise is that conversions are really expensive. And we did not want to further disincentivize or further make problematic the conversion of empty office space, which serves no purpose to the district, to residential space, which would serve a purpose to the district. So I think that's where we're coming from. But, we're happy to have that conversation. It certainly, you're not the first person to raise it. So I understand the question. I understand the concern. But I think my main thought would be that we would not typically apply IZ to a program or to an instance or to a situation which is inconsistent with the IZ program itself.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Elkins?
Yes, I had a question about number 15. It's probably about what the current regulation is and therefore would be the same for the new. But when someone today gets a variance or under this new rule gets a special exception, does that then change the prevailing setback calculation for future decisions? In other words, when they get either the variance or the special exception, it changes that house then is counted next time around to do the prevailing setback?
Great question. And the answer, as far as I know, the answer is that yes, it would.
So there's a certain creep, I would call it a creep toward the street under current regulations, but it's controlled by area variance, and you're suggesting it be done easier with a special exception. So I think this may raise a policy question about whether we want to encourage a creep toward the street, that you're making it easier to do that. If I'm not asking you to agree with my policy view, but am I understanding the technical side of it correctly? That this does result in a creep.
Yes, the provision, this is what makes it kind of so unusual in our zoning regulations, in that not unique, but unusual, is that the provision is based on what exists on other properties. So if what changes on other properties, if what exists on other properties change, then that would change how the provision is applied.
So
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay. It so happens where I live in Wesley Heights, we prevent that through an overlay, but for most of the city, there's a creep. We don't have a creep in Wesley Heights, and we love it the way it is. But anyway, it's a policy issue. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Grunwald?
Yes, hi, quick question. Does number 15 front yard relief, does that apply to all residential zones in the district or just certain zones?
It applies to the low density residential zones. That'd be the D zones. R1 through R3, as well as the RF zones, which are the flat zones.
I see.
It does not apply in the apartment zones, and it does not apply in mixed use zones and other commercial zones.
Okay, so let's say a developer demolishes an existing house and wants to build a new house. He can build it closer to the street, and then when that building is completed, then that sets the new standard for future such development on the same street.
Well,
am I understanding that correct? correctly?
Yeah, the developer would be able to build closer to the street by right currently if it's within that, what shows on this map, in that purple area. That would not impact, or well, actually, it could potentially impact in that it could narrow that band, but that would be allowed by right. Right
Right,
now,
so-
if you wanted to be forward of that purple space, you would require an area variance. And we're proposing that you'd be able to do that by special exception.
I see. Okay, so that, as Commissioner Elkins said, it does, it's a creep toward the street then. I understand. Thank you.
Well, it could be a creep towards the street. It could be a creep away from the street as well. You know, if the most forward property is demolished and the person builds further back from the street, then the line would also move accordingly back back away from the street.
Yeah, but it might, in my observation, that is not what's happening in neighborhoods. I think more new building is taking up more of the lots, and they're moving closer to the street and taking up more of the lot in the rear. But thank you very much. This has satisfied my question. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Joel, can I?
Oh, yes.
Can I just echo what Commissioner Grunwald said? It does seem that the economics of building things militates building more and bigger, and the likelihood of the creep reversing and going backwards if someone were to demolish an existing house and move the facade back is less likely, particularly now. I mean, we do look around our neighborhoods, and even in residential single-family homes, the buildings are getting bigger, they're going further back, and they're going further forward. I think it's unlikely that this will not lead to creep.
Mr. Lawson, could you just clarify for some of us what in general, the difficulty of getting an area variance versus the difficulty of getting a special exception? I think we have a general idea, but I know you follow this more closely. Could you just summarize that for us?
Sure. Yeah, it is an entirely different process. Both processes go to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. You know, a special exception deals with issues of character, light, air, undue impacts on neighbors. So it deals with kind of contextual issues like that. A variance to some extent also deals with some of those issues, but an applicant also has to indicate to the Board of Zoning Adjustment that there is some practical difficulty for an area variance or an undue hardship for a use variance with conforming to the existing regulations. It's a much harder burden to make. So for example, if somebody wants to put a vestibule on their house, and it's within that purple area, they're good to go. But if it's not within that purple area, that would require an area variance. It's a very difficult argument to make for anybody. And it seems, honestly, to us, it just seems inappropriate for an inappropriate process to put a homeowner through who wants to do something on their house. It's not a process you'd have to go through for a rear addition. It's not a process you'd have to go through for a side addition. Due to the fact that this provision is worded as a setback rather than a yard, it is required, an area variance is required for the front. There's no rationale for that. I don't think that was the intent when the provision was put in place. And in fact, we found, and this is in our report, for many years, it was actually evaluated as a special exception because a setback was considered equivalent to a yard. It's only relatively recently that the regulations are being interpreted such that setback is not, for the purposes of this form of relief, considered equivalent to a yard, and therefore the area variance is being required. It's simply an onerous process, and I understand your concerns. I think the zoning regulations also have to account for the reasonable rights of a property owner, and I think that it is appropriate that this be considered a special exception rather than a variance. As I said, it was never intended in the first place to be considered as something that would require a variance. And as you know, as many of you know, this front setback requirement didn't exist for most of the history of our zoning regulations. This came into effect as part of ZR 16. Before that, there was no front setback requirement. You could build as forward or as back as you wanted. We put this in place to try to establish, some reasonable expectation, I guess, of what the streetscape character would look like over time. That's my thoughts. Any other questions on this grouping? All right, Joshua, next slide. We're going to get into some accessory building ones. I think this is, yeah, we're getting close to the end. So next slide, Joshua. Accessory building size is currently limited in both the low density residential or R zones and the RF or residential flat zones. The regulations establish a maximum building area for an accessory building of 450 square feet or an area equal to 30% of the required rear yard, whichever is greater. In many cases, maybe even most cases, the 450 square foot limit is the greater of those two figures. We've received many, many comments from property owners and designers that 450 square foot limitation can make it difficult to provide an accessory dwelling unit within the building, and sometimes even providing just an accessory building without an accessory dwelling unit, along with the required parking and vertical circulation that is often needed for a unit. This is being borne out in BZA cases. Back in April, we identified over 30 cases requesting relief from this provision. Most of those included an accessory dwelling unit. So OP is proposing to increase the permitted size for an accessory building in both the R and RF zones from 450 square feet to 550 in the R3 and RF zones, which tend to have smaller lots, and to 600 square feet in the R1 and R2 zones where the lots are typically larger. This is intended to allow more workable size and particularly to remove a disincentive in the zoning regulations to providing an accessory dwelling unit or a principal dwelling unit within an accessory building. Next slide. Side and rear yard setbacks. Another feature of accessory buildings, whether they have a dwelling unit or not, is that they are not required to provide any setback from a property line. They can be placed right on the lot line. This has raised some concerns as part of some recent BZA cases regarding impacts of those accessory buildings, building maintenance for that accessory building, as well as privacy concerns. Next slide. So OP is proposing some additional changes to establish some setback requirements. That setback requirement would be, the required setback would be 3 feet from a side lot line and 5 feet from a rear lot line in the R1 through R3 zones, where that side or rear lot line is shared with another property. OP's original proposal also included a requirement for a setback from a common lot line in the RF zones. However, as part of the earlier open house sessions that we had back in June. We received some input from ANC Commission members that it should not be applied in the RF zones because the properties are smaller. And we did not want to disincentivize people from doing an accessory building or make it more difficult for people to do an accessory building in those zones. So we're no longer proposing a setback in the RF zones. Next slide. This one, sorry, I just lost my place for a second. This one was regarding accessory apartments in the RF, RA, and MU zones. Now, I need to be clear that this was a technical one, and it deals with the defined term of an accessory apartment not being permitted in those zones. An accessory apartment is a unit that's secondary to the principal one and is required to be rented. One of the units on a property with an accessory apartment must be rented, and the owner must live on the property. It was intended to address the situation in the R1 through R3 zones that an accessory apartment was not a permitted use at all. And so that change was made back as part of around the time of the 2016 regulations to allow an accessory apartment in those low density zones where a second unit is not permitted. In the higher density RF, RA, and MU zones, all of those zones already permit 2 units or more. So it was never intended that the accessory apartment provision would apply in those zones. And in fact, the RF zones make this clear by saying that an accessory apartment is not permitted in the RF zones. That clarification is not provided in the RA and MU zones. And we've actually had cases that were brought forward to the BZA to allow a second unit on a property that happened to be zoned RA, which is a BZA case that's not required. But that highlights the need for this change and the fact that there is some confusion out there. As part of this omnibus, we're proposing language to make it clear that an accessory apartment is not permitted in the RF, RA, and MU zones. This does not impact the number of units that are permitted on any property one way or another. Next slide. All right. Any questions on the 3 proposals for accessory apartments?
Yes.
Sorry, Commissioner Henchman.
Yeah, Jupish Henchman, ANC 5F. On number 16, could you talk about how 550 or 600 square feet was selected? Because when the report it said the average in cases seeking relief was 603 in RF, 708 in R, and then Virginia's up to 750 square feet, Maryland's up to 1,200 square feet. So 550, 600 still seems, well, it surprised me to see a low number like that compared with some of the ones that were out there.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And we based it partly on the research we did of existing cases that went through the BZA process. And we also based it on, prevailing lot size. We kind of looked at how this would relate to things like lot occupancy on properties and how it would relate to other provisions that would be unchanged. And we felt that this was a reasonable approach. We also looked at those cases, some of those BZA cases and what the layouts of the buildings were and what would typically be needed for a reasonable accessory apartment. So we kind of combined all of that. And that's where we came up with the numbers of 600 square feet on the larger zone, larger lot area zones, and 550 on the smaller lot area zones. I'm sure there will be feedback, to the zoning commission that maybe these numbers remain too small. Maybe these numbers are too big. We may get both comments, eventually.
Well,
And certainly through the hearing process, I think it'll be interesting to hear that feedback and see if the zoning commission would instruct us to propose slightly different sizes.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, well, consider this one comment that I think it's too small. Just, I mean, in Architectural Digest, I think puts the lower bound at 600. And since there's no change to the 30% restriction of the rear yard area, yeah, I mean, it just seems too small. Still, I know you're making it from really small to larger, but it seems very restrictive still, especially since the BZA cases you were referencing, the average there seemed to be north of what you're proposing.
Understood. Totally understood. Certainly when the 30% of rear yard provision kicks in, that tends to be for very large lots with a very extensive rear yard, obviously. And so in that case, it would be the greater of the two that would apply. So on a larger lot, you would be able to do, as you can now, a larger accessory building and therefore a larger accessory dwelling unit. So that wouldn't change. Commissioner Grunwald?
Yeah. Yes. Am I unmuted? Yes. I'm a new commissioner, so please refresh my memory. ADUs in DC, there's no restriction on to whom they may be rented, correct? They don't need to be rented only to family. They can be rented to anyone. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yes. And also my second question is, where can I realize that not all of these changes that you've got in the omnibus bill here will pertain to my area, but those that do, I would like to share them with my constituents. And would you kindly tell me how I can get some more detail in writing on the items that I'm interested in for my constituents?
Great question. I think the best source for that would be either the Office of Planning website or the Office of Zoning website. We'll have those websites a bit later on in the presentation. And the Zoning Commission set down reports. The reports to the Zoning Commission go into much more detail, and including draft wording for the proposed changes, why we came up with these changes, what's the rationale for them, what the potential impact would be. And they're arranged kind of in the same order as this presentation. So if you're interested, for example, in number 17, you could simply look at number 17 and find out and find OP's analysis and recommendation for changes to those provisions.
Great. Where exactly can I find that document?
Like I said, it's on the Office of Planning website. And again, it's later on in our presentation, we've got links to those.
Great. Okay, thank you.
But the best source of information, honestly, is the Zoning Commission website. I think you've all used their ISIS portal. That's where they keep all submissions related to every zoning commission or Board of Zoning Adjustment case, including the Office of Planning report. Your ANC reports go in there, and any other comments, applicant filings, everything goes into that record. So that's the best place to go for the complete record on any case before the BZA or the Zoning Commission.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Next slide, Joshua. Great. So a few more kind of technical ones. And I'm sorry we're running long. I'll understand if some of you need to drop off. I'll stick around to the end if that's okay. But we are getting close to being there. And I'm sorry I've taken up so much of your time. Next slide. This one is intended to just a bit of a cleanup in the regulations. And as noted, this is based on comp plan policy direction. The framework element of the comprehensive plan includes a description of each future land use map designation, including a typical floor area ratio and examples of zones for which the future land use map designation is characteristic. So the future land use map sets that kind of policy, land use policy direction, and the description within the comp plan tells us, again, provides that direction of what different zones should be considered. In zoning, most of our zones include a description that is consistent with what's in the comprehensive plan, but a few zone designations are not. And just one more reminder here, it is the comp plan that is intended to provide the policy direction for zoning. The zoning doesn't really provide direction to the comprehensive plan. It's kind of a one-way street in terms of policy direction. But because there's a few zones where the descriptions vary in zoning from the comprehensive plan, that's created some confusion from applicants and members of the public regarding whether a zone is consistent with the future land use map comp plan designation or not, particularly when they're looking at a plan unit development or a zoning map amendment. So we have identified 3 zones where that where there is that disconnect, MU4, MU5, MU7. We're not proposing to change the permitted uses, the permitted height, or the permitted density in any of those zones, simply to change the description of those zones to be more consistent with the description that's in the comprehensive plan. Next slide. I'm not sure if we have any Capitol Hill commissioners on the line right now, but this one applies just to a portion of Capitol Hill. It's the only one that's really kind of geographically specific. But very briefly, the CAP zones, it's an overlay to the MU zones, so in the CAP zones, they establish a lower penthouse height than is typical for mixed use zones, what is permitted in those mixed use zones. All of the CAP, sorry, it's hard to kind of describe. All of the Capitol Hill zones, all the zones that I'm talking about right now, are limited to a height of 40 feet, and typically a mechanical penthouse of 15 feet is permitted in those zones, but in the capital interest zones, the height is limited to only 10 feet. This has led to some concerns from designers and property owners that is actually difficult to put an elevator override, for example, in one of these buildings, and it's just overly restrictive. Next slide. Very simple diagram, kind of a section through the building that shows what we're talking about. Currently limited to 10 feet. We'd be proposing to make it similar to other MU zones of this ilk, which would allow 15 feet. Of course, anybody who wants to provide that height would have to set back further from the edge of the building below, because any penthouse is required to be set back 1-to-1 from the edge of the building below. Next slide. This one applies mostly in the downtown, but also can apply to MU zones. There is a rear yard requirement in these zones, and the relief from that rear yard is permitted by special exception, as is typical. What is unusual in these zones is that in addition to the normal special exception criteria like light and air and privacy, there are also some really kind of complicated and overly specific review criteria related to window placement and proximity of other buildings, facing buildings on the other side of the alley, for example. These unusual provisions can be difficult to interpret and to apply, and are really kind of inconsistent with the requirements for rear yard relief in other zones. They're also somewhat duplicative of the regular special exception criteria, which already address issues like privacy and access to light and air. So they can be an added expense and an added kind of problem to kind of sort out if you're going for special exception relief. And so we're proposing to simply eliminate those very specific requirements. The special exception process would remain, and review against the normal special exception criteria would also remain. Next slide. Any questions on any one of those three? Great. If not, I'm going to just kind of move quickly along. Next slide, please, Josh. So this one was also suggested actually by an ANC Commission member, even before we did the open houses in June. Our neighborhood mixed use zones apply in many parts of the city, including, Macomb, Cleveland Park, Woodley Park. They now apply in Chevy Chase. They now apply a portion of Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast, Tacoma, George Avenue. Anything with an MU in front of it in the zoning is one of our neighborhood mixed use zones. Each one of these includes a requirement for designated uses and that they provided along specific street frontages, typically the main street running through the center of the neighborhood mixed use zoned area. These designated uses are generally intended to provide for an activated retail or mixed-use experience along the streetscape and to provide uses that will serve the surrounding neighborhood. And the current designated uses include things like restaurant, retail, general finance and services, arts and entertainment, and animal care. But it was suggested that daytime care, something like a daycare for kids, it's already permitted use in the zones, but it was suggested we add those as a preferred use to kind of encourage their provision along these designated streets. We think this was a great addition. So thank you. Next slide. This one is also dealing with a redundancy. We've talked about some in the past. Some of the past amendments are doing the same kind of thing. Subtitle U establishes the uses that are allowed in all zones, including in residential low-density zones, R zones. In these zones, the permitted residential use is a principal. The main permitted use is a residential single dwelling unit. So once again, in these zones, the main use is a single principal dwelling unit on a property. However, the subtitle U provision then adds building type descriptions for the various zones, whether it's detached, semi-detached, or attached, which is not a building use, rather that is a building type. Building type rather, is already regulated in at least two places in the development standards of subtitle D. So OP is proposing to remove the redundant form language from the use chapter. The language would remain in subtitle Z, so there'd be no change in zoning to the type of use that would be permitted, the type of building that would be permitted on the zone. There would be no change to the type of use that would be permitted in the various zones. And our last one, Joshua, next slide. This is the last one, finally. The RF zones permit 2 units by right on the property, and the 2016 zoning regulation update allowed one of those units to be an accessory building within an accessory unit on the property. This can be a rental unit or it can be a second principal unit on the property because it's RF. 2 zones are already permitted in that zone. However, at the time this provision was put in place, provisions were added due to some concerns from some community members, which were specifically intended, frankly, to restrict the right of property owners to actually take advantage of this provision. Those provisions were put in place and they to only allow a dwelling unit within an accessory building if that accessory building was constructed prior to 2013, and to require special exception review of any expansion of an existing accessory building, including a second-story addition, for the addition of a dwelling unit. This clearly serves to limit the flexibility of homeowners wishing to provide a second unit on their property. It's inconsistent with housing policy, and it's inconsistent with the intent of the zone, which is to allow 2 units on a lot. As such, we're proposing to remove these restrictions. We have seen a number of requests for relief for this in front of the BZA, and we feel that this is one that should be changed to allow that additional unit by right within a new accessory dwelling unit. Finally, we're also proposing to, sorry, let me just finish, I'm almost done. We're also proposing to slightly amend the alley access requirements for a unit within an accessory building in the RF zones. These access requirements would correspond to other access requirements we would have for similar buildings. So they're simply intended to be consistent, provide consistency as part of different parts of the regs. Josh, keep on this slide, but that's it for me. And questions, Commissioner Nagy?
Super quick question, because everyone wants to go, but can you explain to me, and I'm a newbie at this whole zoning thing, how this overlaps, if at all, with the previous discussion of bumping out houses and creating accessory dwelling units? Is this a completely separate topic? Because we talked about not going up, possibly not going up past 10 feet with Jennifer Steingasser, and does this overlap
Well, those
with
are,
that?
yeah.
Does this...
Those are 2 very different provisions. The provision that Jennifer was talking about earlier deals with the building form. It deals with how big an addition can be. That addition is not necessarily for a second unit on the property, and in fact, in some zones, a second unit would not be permitted. That one deals with how much you can extend out. This provision deals with an accessory unit or a second dwelling unit, depending on the zone on the property. So they're very, very different things.
So can I just follow up for a second? Because this is something that I was thinking of when you were originally addressing accessory dwelling units. What is the height limitation on an accessory dwelling unit?
There's not a height limit for an accessory dwelling unit. There's a height limit for an accessory building. And the height limit for an accessory building is 22 feet, whether it includes a dwelling unit or not.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. But can you get an exception, the variance? I don't know whether it would be a variance or an exception now based on the previous conversation, but
yeah,
can you build
typically,
higher, 22 feet
typically
by some means?
Yeah, typically relief from height requires a variance, and it would be if you wanted to do an accessory building taller than 22 feet. That would be a variance.
So in an R1 zone, can you get a variance to a height restriction on an accessory building, whether you're using it as a dwelling or not?
You can apply for it.
Right.
It would be difficult. It would be a difficult, as we talked about under the front setback, it's a very difficult argument to make. For that reason, we don't really see a lot of requests for that, and it would be difficult to support. There'd have to be something very, very unusual and unique about the circumstances of the property that would warrant an area variance.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the questions. Thanks. Any other thoughts on this last set of proposed amendments or questions? Okay, Joshua, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. This is
Josh. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr.
Joel, Yeah, I'm so sorry. I couldn't figure out how to get my hand up again there. I'm doing too many things at once. I did have a question about the last slide. Did you say something about adding alley access to accessory dwelling units in that last slide?
Sure. There's currently provisions regarding how, if you're providing access to an accessory unit within an accessory building, there are requirements for what that access needs to be, how wide the alley needs to be, how far it is from the street. Those access requirements have changed for other uses, such as for an alley lot building. And we're simply proposing to make the rules consistent, across these various provisions.
So what kind of access is allowed for an alley? So basically, you're creating, in effect, these ADUs with alley access are mini houses that have their own little street, right? I mean, basically, that's what it is.
I'm not sure I understand the question. They don't have a separate street.
No, but I'm saying that their alley is serving as a street. So in effect, they're mini houses with on a mini street, which is the alley. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so you've got an ADU and you've got access to an alley. So in effect, the ADU is a mini house and the alley is a mini street. So that's what I'm saying. You're creating a mini house on a mini street.
We're not proposing to change the alley at all. The alley would remain exactly what it is.
Right, I understand.
As it is under the current regulations.
Right. No, I'm just describing the current situation. Yeah, which is not really pertinent. But how are you changing the alley access? Are you making it larger, greater, wider? I'm not quite sure I understand.
Again, we're not changing the access. We're changing the requirements that if your permanent access is provided from the alley, what that access needs to look like. Under the old regulations, the alley needed to be, for example, 24 feet wide. Very few alleys in the districts are 24 feet wide. So that was a significant restriction on the ability of homeowners to provide that accessory dwelling unit in an accessory building. Those regulations have changed for other uses, such as alley lots, which are different from an accessory unit in an accessory building, but the access would be just the same. So it would change we're proposing to change it from 24 feet to 15 feet.
I see. That's the answer I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. No, it was my problem trying to get that out. I understand now.
I should have provided a little bit more detail on that one. Sorry.
Okay.
Again, all of the detail is in our OP report,
Okay.
and happy to have a further conversation with anybody who would like to talk about it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. Next slide, Josh. Just a couple of closing out slides that I wanted to keep going. Just a couple of heads up. Just so that you're aware of it while you're here. We do have other text amendments that are coming forward, including for alley lots, but also one for our A1 zone. Some of you may have attended open houses held earlier this year on these. These also have public hearings scheduled, and our staff will be contacting you with dates and times for a similar conversation to this one, open houses for those two proposals. It's looking right now like they're going to be the week of October the 20th, but we're still kind of finalizing those dates. So you should be receiving those invitations sometime this week. So just a heads up to watch out for those. Next slide. In addition, for the commissioners in Ward 3, I'm sure you're well aware that we're also proposing some fairly big map and text amendment cases along portions of Connecticut Avenue and Wisconsin Avenue. These are text and map amendments based on pretty explicit comprehensive plan policy direction to do so, but they would also incorporate additional design guidance of the relevant planning studies that were done back in 2022 and 2023 through 2024. Those are also now set down. The first one for Cleveland Park and Woodley Park is a hearing date set for December 1st. The second one is anticipated right now to be December 11th, but that's still kind of in flux. So if you would like to discuss either one or both of those cases, there will be additional ANC meetings on these, or if you want to talk to us about these or having some ANC meetings about these, we'd be happy to do that. Feel free to reach out to me or to the emails shown on this sheet, which would go to the project managers for those cases. Next slide. And that's it, finally. So as I said, if you want to see the detail, it's available on the Office of Planning website, which is just planning. I'm sorry, I realize right now I don't have this on our website. Planning.dc.gov or the OP the Office of Zoning website, which is dcoz.dc.gov. And all of that detail is there. You might want to first check out the Office of Planning set-down report, because that's the one that provides a lot more of this detail on these proposals, including the actual draft language. We will be submitting additional reports over the next few weeks, which are called our hearing reports. They'll be submitted prior to the hearing, but obviously you are all encouraged and invited to attend those zoning commission meetings or to provide comments to the record. Sorry, Commissioner Grunwald, or sorry, Commissioner Elkins.
Are we allowed to testify at those hearings of the zoning commission?
You are not only allowed, you are encouraged to testify at those hearings. The zoning commission they love to hear from everybody, but they particularly love to hear from ANC commissioners. So yes, absolutely.
Do you know the rule, remind us of the rules of signing up and this one? I mean, are we automatically parties, so to speak, or we need to sign up, and do you know the time limits? I know that's a different office than yours, but
yeah, it is. Technically, you wouldn't sign up as a party to the case.
Yes, right.
But you would certainly sign up. You can certainly sign up as wishing to speak. Typically, honestly, for anybody who shows up at a zoning commission hearing, particularly an ANC commissioner, whether you sign up or not, the commissioner is going to want to hear your comments, so they'll allow you that opportunity. But it's always a good idea to contact the Office of Zoning in advance to sign up, to let them know that you intend to speak. Just so you know, the zoning commission hearing will be structured a lot like this presentation, in that we'll go through a few of the, actually the same kind of breakup of proposed text amendments, and then the zoning commission will break for their own comments, as well as to receive comments from the public on those particular ones, and then we'll move on to the next set of text amendments. So it'll be structured a lot like this meeting was.
Sounds like it will go all day.
It could go on for a while. So far, the zoning commission has scheduled one hearing. The hearings start at 4 o'clock, and they can go certainly later into the afternoon and evening. But that's how the zoning commission has scheduled it so far.
Good, thank you.
Great, thanks.
One long day is better than 24 different days.
Commissioner Nagy, I think you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you. Well, I just was looking back 2 slides to the hearing public hearing that's scheduled for RA1 zones and for alley lot text amendments. When you talked about that slide, it seemed like there were going to be meetings, they're going to happen in the next 2 weeks, and then like 2 weeks after that, there'll be a public hearing. That seems like did I misunderstand that? Because if I didn't, it seems like a very short, compressed period of time. And I have to say that my overall sense of the omnibus zoning amendments is that everything is moving very, very fast, and that people are perhaps not having enough time to take it on board and think about it and then comment.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that. Yeah, I'm sorry you feel that way. These are following kind of the normal zoning commission processes for any text or map amendment, except that typically we would not be having these. In the past, anyways, we've not had these ANC open house sessions. It's something that we've started to do, over the last year or two, to give ANC commissioners in particular, as the representatives of your constituents, an opportunity for additional input, and it's been really valuable to us. As I said, we've already made changes to a number of these text amendments based on the earlier feedback we received, back at the open houses we held back in June. So these aren't particularly new cases. They've been around, they've been under discussion, for quite a few months now. Again, they're following the regular process. Again, I'm happy to have a separate conversation with anybody who would like to know more or want to provide comments. And of course, the hearing in front of the Zoning Commission is the ultimate way to make your thoughts and your concerns, or the things that you support or don't support, be known to the Zoning Commission.
Well, I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. Sorry. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. This is a valuable session.
Great. Well, thank you. They're certainly valuable to us. And like I said, what we can do to make them more valuable to you, we're happy to do. The open houses for the other two cases, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have them far enough into the process that we're fairly clear on what the OP proposal should be, but giving enough time for ENCs to understand it before the hearing, and also enough time for us to make modifications to our proposal to the Zoning Commission based on the feedback that we received from you all.
Thank you.
Great. If there's nothing else, I just really want to thank you all for your time. I know I've kept you way over time. I'm sorry. I'll try to take that into account for the afternoon session we're having. If you have fellow commissioners who you think would benefit from being part of this conversation, or that we would benefit from having as part of that conversation, please let them know about the session, which is this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Otherwise, feel free to reach out with any other comments or questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too. Bye now.
Thank you.